everyone. Welcome to today's session, CreativeXR 60 Prototypes On. I'm Liz Rosenthal. I'm the executive producer of CreativeXR and also the curator of immersive content for Venice International Film Festival. So CreativeXR is a unique content accelerator program supporting the development and finance of early stage XR projects. Since 2017, we have run 3 cohorts that have financed and supported the development of 60 prototypes by leading UK creators. Many of the completed works have gone on to be featured at major film festivals and other festivals, cultural venues, and on storefronts. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by creators from 3 of the cohorts and the 2 program leads from the Arts Council England and the Digital Catapult, who are the organisations behind the programme. So let me introduce you to our panellists. First, Darren Emerson from eCity Films, Abdalla from Anagram, Gaëlle Mourre from Fat Red Bird, and then we have Crosti, programme lead at the Digital Catapult, and Ben Lane, Senior Manager of Enterprise and Innovation at the Arts Council. So we're going to start off by having a presentation by Maddie, and she's going to give us an overview of the programme. Hi, Maddie.
Hi, Liz. Thanks for the introduction. So hello, everyone. My name is Maddie Crosti, and I'm the program lead of CreativeXR and of other immersive programs at Digital Catapult. So I've been running this program since 2018, starting halfway through its first cohort, and we're now on its 3rd. So I've been part of the journey of seeing the program changing and evolving over the years, both in terms of the immersive formats that we have supported and that we've seen go through the programs, but also seeing the program grow as a brand name and seeing the UK industry itself mature over the years. So first off, let me explain to those of you who don't know what the program is, how it works. So as Liz said, it's a content accelerator program for the arts, culture, and entertainment sector for immersive creators looking to create a VR, AR, immersive audio, haptics, any XR technology experience. And this program was born from a partnership between Digital Catapult and Arts Council England, but we have picked up various supporters along the way, including our friends at Story Futures Academy, who also helped us deliver and finance some of the program this year, and Epic Games, who contributed with an Epic Mega Grant, and also through technical support for the teams this year. So the way that the program works is we run an open call for every cohort for creative project ideas that utilize immersive technologies. And we usually receive about 250 applications every year, and we select 20 out of those 250. And to each of those 20, we award £20,000 to create an immersive prototype of their experience that they need to use over a period of 3 to 5 months. And during those months, we also give them access to industry mentors, experts, free use of the immersive lab network, which this year involved shipping equipment, of course. We run a series of workshops around things like business plan development and IP. And then we run a showcase event where we connect the creators to key industry who might help bring their projects further. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later. And finally, after the showcase, we award a select number of projects that have the highest potential with a bit more funding to finish their prototypes into an experience that is audience ready. And this funding is almost always matched by industry funding, especially given that through the years, the budgets have grown more and more. And as Liz said, so far we have completed 3 cohorts and funded and helped development of 60 prototypes, as well as awarded production funding to 12 projects. And you'll be hearing a bit more from those projects later on. And finally, this is just to illustrate why we decided to make our intervention this way and why the program is built this way. And I really can't speak about it without crediting Becky Gregory-Clark, who is now head of immersive at Story Futures Academy, but spearheaded this research back in 2016 when she was at Digital Catapult. And basically, we looked at the production pipeline and wanted to find where the barriers and obstacles were for UK creators to use this technology in their projects, because there was obviously a huge hunger for it, but there was a lack of funding. So if you look at the creation process of an immersive project, we found that there was a gap and the need for intervention between the ideation stage and the production stage. And this slide, it illustrates where those interventions lie. So basically we found that there was not much support for creators to experiment and to develop early stage concepts into strong commissionable ideas that would also have a sustainable business model or impact model to sustain it. And we found that the greatest intervention would come by giving small amounts of money to several creators to allow them to experiment and iterate over a short period of time. And the other key barrier that we found was that the commissioning ecosystem itself was very fragmented, spanning from broadcasters to hardware manufacturers to film funds. So we had a role in gathering that ecosystem together to allow projects to meet those commissioners and be able to pitch to them. So I just wanted to illustrate what the showcase and market means, which is that pivotal event after the 3 to 5 months when the teams have created their prototype, where we showcase the prototypes to commissioners that we have invited from all over the world to come and see the projects with the hope that they will bring these projects forward. And obviously 2019 looked very different than 2020. You can see May there pitching in person back when we could do that. In 2020, we had a similar setup as the South by Southwest setup, actually with swap card and VR chat, but at a much smaller scale. But we were still able to gather together an amazing audience of commissioners and funders, with much credit to our executive producer, Liz, who's moderating today. So that's it from me. I'll see you at the panel, and I'm going to hand back to Liz.
Thank you, Maddie. So now we're going to hear from the 3 creators who will introduce us to the projects they've developed with us. And I just want to say, please put any questions in the chat and we'll hopefully answer them as we go along. So first up is Darren Emerson. Darren participated in our first cohort. He's going to tell us about his project, Common Ground. Hi, Darren.
Hello, how are you doing? Yeah, so Common Ground is a documentary about the Aylesbury estate in South London, which was once the biggest housing estate in Europe. The piece is about the regeneration of that estate and the displacement of the community. It really, I guess that's the focus, but it really looks at the history of social housing in the UK, what that meant, how design and the implementation of ideas gets subverted by commercial interests. And it's also about the portrayal of working class people in the sort of media. It fused 360 video, archive, it used animation, but also photogrammetry in real-time environments with interaction to kind of create a bit of a fusion of all the different techniques that I was using at the time and kind of put it into one project. So yeah, that's what it's about. And we have a trailer here that we can play. So if we play the Common Ground trailer, that'd be great.
It was a really good place to bring up a family. That's why I chose to live in this area. And that's why I'd like to stay.
I don't think you'll ever find a stronger community.
My home means an awful lot to me. You know, I've brought a family up there. My late husband died there.
Whole community is gonna be wiped out from here, and our voice never been heard.
London is becoming a city for wealthy people, especially inner city London.
We need to go to make way for empty flats for foreign investors.
Okay, So hopefully that trailer gives you a sense of what it's about, and you know, and there you go. So Liz, are you going to ask me some questions about?
I will ask you some questions. So thanks, Darren. So with Common Ground, you completed that, was it in 2018, I think?
It was the cohort that started in 2017 in terms of the prototype. We delivered the prototype in about, I think it was about March 2018, and then we got further funding that summer. And then we produced the whole piece, which we delivered around February 2019, and then it went on to premiere in April.
Great, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. So how did you launch the project, and what happened to it since that time?
Well, I mean, we had the showcase obviously at CreativeXR with everybody there. That was March 2019. And then we were lucky enough to do our world premiere at Tribeca Film Festival there at their immersive section. And then we went on to show it around the world at different film festivals. So it had its UK premiere at Sheffield Doc Fest, Alternate Realities. It played in Melbourne, in Canada. And along the way, it went on to win a few awards. It won Best VR Narrative at Sandbox in China, the sort of award for innovation at Nouveau Cinema in Montreal. Also the World Press Photo Award for Best VR Storytelling, and a Broadcast Digital Award here in the UK as well for Best VR.
Great, congratulations, Darren. And what about releasing it beyond festivals? Have you managed to distribute it on storefronts, or I know you have a big plan for location-based entertainment, obviously slightly curtailed for this year. But can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the idea with Common Ground was always to try and get it out to people in communities that were represented within the piece of work itself. So lower income communities, regional communities around the UK, predominantly. That was kind of my dream for that. And so we put together a report, which we published at the end of last year for the BFI, which looked into how we could tour Common Ground using the BFI Film Hub network regionally, but also using that as a launch pad to go and show it in sort of council estates and stuff like that. So that was kind of the plan in terms of location based. We've also made a 360 version, which the BFI funded for the BFI London Film Festival last year, which was really great for us because, you know, obviously 360 is much more accessible than the room scale version. It's currently being shown in the Museum of Other Realities as part of the Immersive Arcade, which is a celebration of the best of British immersive, which is really fantastic. But I mean, it's been very hard to distribute it, if I'm honest. When I made it, I was slightly naive about distribution, I think. And, you know, I got it ready for the end of CreativeXR, got it into Tribeca, and that was the version that still exists today. What I didn't realize, now I look back on that and think, you know, how we should maybe allocate some budget, but taking that version, which used very high spec computers, very, you know, something that we could set up ourselves, but to get it onto a store like the Oculus Store or Steam, it has to work on lots of computers that have different kind of specs and stuff like that, and different headsets. And we hadn't really done the work to make sure that happened, and now we don't really have the budget to do that. So I'm, you know, I'm working slowly to get that, but that is definitely a learning. And there's a project I'm working on at the moment where that has gone into the budget, those different versions, the exhibition version, which is very complex and has an installation with it, but also a store version and a 360 version, because most people will probably see the 360 version. It's far more accessible.
Great, thanks, Darren. And we're going to talk a bit about that later, about partnerships and distribution, which is a key factor and something that we love to get involved in, and you know, give advice early on in the program. And we've learned quite a lot from doing the different cohorts. Thanks so much, Darren. I'm now going to move on to May. So May took part in cohorts 1 and 2. She had a project called the Collider, fantastic installation project that was in our first cohort, and then came back with her project Goliath, which she's going to talk about now.
Thanks, Liz. Yes, so Goliath is an interactive virtual reality experience that celebrates the power of gaming in the face of isolation brought on by mental illness. So I'll play you a short promo. It's still in production, so there's more to come, and then I'll give you a little bit more insight after that. So please play the teaser.
I don't normally tell people about some of the shit you're asking. It's something that I understand and everyone won't. Schizophrenia is not a proven illness. They name you that because they can't explain anything else about you. They call you schizophrenic. Just because you're labelled crazy doesn't mean that you're dangerous. If I didn't have online gaming, I don't know where I'd be. No one wants to lose. Everyday life, you don't want to lose, do you? Sometimes you don't have control, but you do it in a game. Hey you, big guy. You're in the game too, you big sack of pudding. Let's go. Every game is doing something that's impossible to do in real life. Love changes everything. No, I'll stop doing that. Oh, blow my mind, mate. Absolutely blow my mind. That's just awesome.
So in Goliath, you're guided by the voice of Joe, who you just heard, and he's the man behind Goliath, and he takes you into the story of how psychosis means it's very difficult to tell the difference between what is and isn't real. And obviously, because you're also inside the headset in this unreal environment, and you begin to play a game too, the experience also asks you to reflect on your own interpretation of how you're working out what is and isn't real, kind of using the power of actually what VR does to occasionally trick the mind into feeling like you're really somewhere else. So Goliath is a really important passion project for our studio Anagram. Schizophrenia is a condition that's really poorly understood, often quite badly portrayed in cinema, and the links between psychosis and violence is overemphasized in the media, making it a really isolating diagnosis for people to have. And we felt like, having made a couple of VR projects, we were really excited about finding a story that really needed to be told in this medium, because it is a story about somebody living in a virtual reality. And there's real value in seeing inside of that experience, an experience that we often see from the outside. And the fact that Goliath, Joe, is now a hero in his own world, in the Twitch community, with online gaming, it felt like we could also celebrate something that's become even more relevant during lockdown. So the virtual experience of digital connection, as we're all experiencing now, and what it means for people who are on the outside of what is considered to be normal. Yeah, so go ahead, Liz, ask me anything.
Difficult question, no. So
in numbers. And so in terms of post-festivals, from the very beginning, we've been speaking to science museums, science galleries. Can you hear yourself?
We're all fine, May. We can hear you fine.
Okay, great. And so I'm on a replay. This is quite strange. So I'm going to have to take my headphones off just to be able to concentrate on what I'm saying. And so the other layer, the part of the work that we did while we were building the first version of the prototype is we did a lot of work with Mind and UCL and McPinn Foundation, who work within patient health. And we interviewed people who have schizophrenia as a diagnosis or bipolar. And we asked them, where do you feel like it's really important for you to put a piece of work like this? And the answer was quite unanimous, which they were like, our doctors, like people in the medical industry, and not just that kind of like frontline services. we feel that they treat us not as people, but as diagnoses. And so that in that sense, there's this real value to expanding, I would not go as far to say like empathy, because it's a bit of a treacherous ground when you talk about VR, but in terms of like, how do, at what stage in the medical education process is something like Goliath actually a really useful tool for improving how doctors deliver healthcare with people with these conditions? So that's kind of the third stage.
Great, it's so interesting, the amount of projects I'm seeing coming from creators that are crossing over these different sectors and have different purposes. I mean, we had another project actually called Hatsumi that was in our last cohort that is also working with the medical sector, and it's all to do with chronic pain and how you can envisage it and how doctors can it could be used as a diagnostic tool, because it's exactly, it's so exciting seeing the kind of hybrid formats we're seeing coming out. So in terms of audience, I guess you've got so many different strategies, but I think what's really exciting about the project also is the fact that you have Oculus as a partner.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to mention that. So Oculus, they came to see the first prototype at the CreativeXR showcase where you saw my photograph, and we pitched it there, and they have a strand called VR for Good, which, I don't know, it's like the dream commission, to be honest, because it just effectively, it's funding for your project, and their strand kind of aligned in that they have a focus on mental health, and so they wanted to put that funding towards a project that was dealing with that issue. So yeah, that was really lucky, other than the fact we developed it for Vive, and so it had a completely different aesthetic, and actually changing from tethered to untethered at that time was pretty crippling. We kind of had to pull the financing to do that out of nowhere. But actually in the long run, it's proven that actually the Quest is the dominant headset, and it's better to be developing for that right now than Vive. But who knows what's going to happen kind of in the next phase of the tech giant battleground for the leading headset.
And great, at least, Oculus are financing projects like this, which is great news, and exciting that it's going to reach a wide audience through the storefront. We also have another project called Madrid Noir that Oculus got involved in our second cohort. So we're really excited about these projects launching to see how it works with your kind of hybrid distribution as well. Obviously LBE and reaching a whole different type of audience and the storefront. So thank you, May. We're going to move on now to Gaëlle. So Gaëlle Mourre was part of our recent third cohort, which we've just finished the first phase, and we're just about to announce who we've awarded the production funding to. But Gaëlle's project is A History of Painting, and big congratulations to you, Gaëlle, because Gaëlle's been selected for the virtual cinema competition at South by Southwest. So please, anybody who has accreditation, make sure you get a chance to see it. It's a really wonderful project. So fire away, Gaëlle.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, it's super exciting for us to have our premiere at South by Southwest. History of a Painting is the first episode of what we're working on to be a series. And the idea is that it's a VR series that bridges the gap between entertaining, immersive art and an educational experience, making art history basically much more accessible, because it's often seen as highbrow and inaccessible and not inclusive. And so the experience that's premiering at South by Southwest revolves around Georges Seurat and his most famous painting called La Grande Jette, which was his pointillist masterpiece. And it revolves, so it essentially explores the story of Georges Seurat and how he came to make this painting. And basically why we should care, why is this painting important? Why has it inscribed itself in popular culture? Most of us don't really know why we pay attention to these paintings, and that's what we want to explore. We want to empower people and give them the tools and confidence to feel like they're part of the art history conversation, because art history is often a commentary on our society, and it certainly gives us a window into how culture has evolved through time. And we're also working with contemporary artists who narrate each episode. And so we worked with Beach Label, who narrated the pilot absolutely beautifully. And actually you can hear her in the trailer. So please play the History of a Painting trailer.
Do you know this painting? I mean, you've probably seen it before, right? But actually, what do you know about this painting? Why is this one important? Why do some paintings stand the test of time and not others? All great paintings have something in common. They have a great story behind them. This project is about uncovering these stories, changing your views on the paintings that changed the world.
Thank you, Gaëlle. So with this project, you actually completed it with a £20,000 prototype, which was kind of amazing because we don't expect that at all with projects. So you've completed the first episode. It's in competition. You've got tons of press, which is brilliant about the project. What happens now? What are you planning for developing the project out?
Yeah. So it was kind of insane to make a whole episode within that time frame, but absolutely worth it. And so now what we're working towards is creating a collection of episodes with a single gallery. So we can't quite announce it yet, but we will be working in partnership with a major UK gallery for the next steps. And we'll also be working towards establishing how to export essentially this project to multiple galleries and different iterations. We're starting off with paintings because that's what makes most sense under lockdown, but obviously fixed off VR lends itself super well to sculpture and physical space. So we'll be thinking about that as we explore the next few episodes.
Great, thank you so much, Gaëlle. I now want to bring all of the panelists into the discussion, and please remember to ask any questions. We would love to answer them. So I want to bring Ben in because we haven't heard from Ben yet. So hi, Ben.
Good morning, hello.
Hi, so Ben is at the Arts Council and has been, so Maddie and Ben lead on the programme from the two organisations. So Ben, you've been there since the start. Can you talk about our rationale for the programme from your perspective from the Arts Council? It'd be really interesting to hear.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing to say is that the kind of motivation here all fits under the broad heading of the importance of there being creative engagement between technology and arts. And that's always been true since people started using sticks and rocks as musical instruments and extracting pigments and crafting paste to paint on cave walls. So all of that said, in particular for the Arts Council, we're very keen to kind of make sure that kind of engagement continues, and looking at that particularly through the kind of three main lenses of the content, the audiences for it, and the business models that you can build around it. And I think that's something that's a very strong feature of CreativeXR, and you can see through the way that we've worked with Digital Catapult to develop the programme, that those kind of three bases, we really try to cover those in terms of the experience that the participants get. In doing so, of course, there are some kind of vital steps in that, and Maddie showed you the logic model earlier that the kind of the program sits behind and why we've made the intervention at the kind of prototyping and production phases. So I think really important to that is understanding the need for that kind of production pipeline, but in order to do that, you need some kind of talent and skills development pipeline as well. So particularly when you're working with a new medium and where that medium is such an interesting space to play, in that it isn't just about the arts and technology fusing together, it's also about different sectors working together, as you kind of heard with talking about May and the kind of reach into the medical sector, but also across the arts and culture subsidized sector into the commercial sectors. And it's just because it's new and because it's fresh and because it's just, as I say, it's such an interesting space for people to be able to play in. And so as a funder, I believe it's our role to help enable that to happen.
Thank you, Ben. And I think, you know, it's really hard. You know, Maddie mentioned the word ecosystem, which I think is really important. And you've also sort of alluded to it. But I think when we started in 2017, we're only really 3 years off the Oculus Rift being sold as a consumer device, even though we know that, you know, that's a very dubious term. There are few consumers have it. Had bought the device. it was the first time that people actually could use a headset, and artists and creators could start using it to make entertainment and content. So we were kind of quite early on, and I suppose there wasn't really an ecosystem. So I guess that was the important part really of the program. And it was when I was helping Becky with that original report, I fed into it a bit. I think that was the thing that I had noticed, that you mentioned new technology. We forget, like you said, every single form of, especially screen-based media has got so much technology in it. We just take it for granted. And it's so difficult for people creating, because they have to use, there's new technology evolving. They have to learn how to use it, develop a language. And then there's all the stuff about financing and distribution. So, yeah.
I think that you touched on a very important point there, the thing about developing a language. And I think that's something that you almost have to be in it to really understand, is that the technology leads to the need for that kind of language. So, I mean, I'm down in Brighton, and I discovered only recently that the way of shooting conversations between people, the kind of over the shoulder camera shot, was actually invented on Hove Beach. And when you kind of realize that people do have to give some thought and technical thought to these things and how they work best in an aesthetic sense, you kind of see why we need to have an accelerator in this space to enable that development to actually happen.
Yeah, and it was really great that you got involved as a funder. So Maddie, I want to bring you back into the discussion. Something I think is really interesting to talk about actually is just to give an idea of some of the types of projects we've had on the program, because it's interesting looking at, we wanted to choose 3 really excellent makers from the program. But it's interesting to think you have kind of hybrid documentaries, very strong documentaries, or kind of hybrid documentary forms. We've also had a lot of other types of works. When we talk about XR, we're talking about things that are so wide, from 360 video to multiplayer performance pieces. So Maddie, do you want to just give an idea about some other projects?
Yeah,
formats?
Definitely. I think this year was especially interesting because the open call was closing right at kind of the height of the pandemic, and we actually decided to extend it and encourage creators to really think about where will audiences be able to experience your experience in the future, in this new future that I guess I lasted a lot longer than expected, but it was pretty amazing to see the responses that came out of that, the very quick responses as well. So this year especially, we saw a big trend was at-home AR projects, which include physical goods as well. So physical goods that you receive in the mail, for example, a set piece where that you put on a table, and then you have your mobile phone, and sort of a theater production takes place on that set piece that is mapped on that set piece through augmented reality. So there was a project called The Foundling that used that type of technology, which was really interesting. And we also had some projects that actually didn't use any sort of headsets or mobile sets at all, and just use your laptop. For example, the project Corptopia, that was a live performance experience through a platform such as Zoom, that had sort of live actors and mapped augmented reality onto the actors. So that was also a great one. And also we saw in terms of that type of screen-based experience, we had a project called Trump's Tower by Satori Studio and Burrow Productions, which was actually just using XR technology, so like the game engines, to create a screen-based experience. So experimenting with virtual production was also an interesting one that we saw this year. So I think I think it's been really interesting over the past 3 years to see sort of the formats evolve, especially as the Quest has come out, a lot more projects on the Oculus Quest, which have been more accessible.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. I think what's been interesting is seeing that I think the sector, and it's something Darren alluded to, has been, was very dependent on location-based installations, which are very difficult to pull off. Very important, obviously, bringing XR to audiences, because a lot of people don't own devices still. It's not, you know, these are still not mainstream devices. So actually bringing things out to audiences and really working on how you exhibit XR is really important. But we've now been, so we had a lot of projects that were relying on that form of distribution, because there's, you know, it's harder to get published. You know, going through the Oculus store, there's a long QA process. It's quite difficult sometimes to get on it, depending on what the content is. And then there aren't that many sort of consumer platforms left. Obviously, there's Steam, which is incredibly important, Viveport. But still, I think location-based was something we saw a lot of, and we saw theatre companies, like we've had the National Theatre this year, have got a location-based entertainment, a location-based piece that's going to be in venues called Austerity on Trial by Sasha Wares. It's also an English touring theatre project as a partnership between the two organisations. But we had things that were sort of like live performance, like Fatherland was one of the projects. It was a really interesting prototype where it was live mocapped actors acting to an audience on a stage, with some of the audience going onto the stage and being in the headset and part of the experience. So it was, we've seen all kinds of things, but this year, as you pointed out, I think it's been amazing how the sector has risen to the challenge of being at home due to the pandemic. And we, you know, innovators always come up, you know, innovation comes out of times of crisis, and we've certainly seen amazing projects come out of that sector. So I want to, we've got some questions actually coming in from the audience, and there were things that I wanted to ask anyway, so it's perfect. The first one is from Kate Hudson. So what did CreativeXR allow you to do that you wouldn't have been able to manage otherwise? So I'm not going to ask Maddie and Ben that, though they can answer that, because there may be some interesting answers from that. But I'm going to start here with Gaëlle, actually.
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that, because well, we really couldn't have made History of a Painting without CreativeXR support. That's, you know, absolutely clear. Not only because of the funding, but also because of the in-kind support and how we were guided through the process. We're a micro team, and so we really benefited a lot from the support of CreativeXR, which is not just really a creative accelerator, but it's also a business accelerator. It's been incredibly important for us to grow our business and to grow Fat Red Bird and to make it, you know, a contender now on the XR market. So yeah, it's hands down been an amazing opportunity for us.
Great, thank you, Gaëlle. And Darren, I want to go back to you actually, because you were right, you were on the first program, and it was kind of, it was a different program then. But what could you say about the process for you?
Well, I think up until that point, I mean, I think CreativeXR was my first real experience of proper arts funding in many ways. But before that, I had made VR pieces or 360 pieces that had been at festivals and stuff like that. But to be honest, I had to self-fund those, and we did that through our commercial part of our business. You know, we would invest that into some of this, into artistic work. So having CreativeXR, you know, come along, it really just allowed us to have that space and time to really experiment. And I think that was the most important element of that first sort of £20,000. It enabled us to sort of teach ourselves new skills that we hadn't really kind of ventured into. So we'd been predominantly 360, and this was the first piece where we were using a game engine. We taught ourselves how to do photogrammetry, but it allowed us to kind of go through that process of kind of making a few mistakes, you know, behind closed doors, and being able to kind of then at the end of that sort of present what we wanted to do. So it was kind of vitally important to that, and actually really sort of rewarding. And I guess, you know, the fact that we got follow-on funding was even better. You know, it's great making sort of prototypes, and it's really valuable, but to have the opportunity to then take that further and actually realize the vision that you had from that prototype was amazing, really. It was incredible.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. And I want to ask May as well, because you've been on 2 of the cohorts with 2 very different projects. You know, what did you Was it a different experience for you, going from cohort 1 to 2? Obviously, we awarded you, it was prototyping money for the Collider, but you went on to show that at festivals and complete it, which was an amazing feat. And then obviously with Goliath, which is a very different project.
So I think like the advantage of CreativeXR is it's funding that comes from an organization that understands technology. And so you can, you know, get bits of money from different places, but it's a very different experience in terms of what the expectations are, in terms of what you deliver, your delivery is. So the fact that that understanding of perhaps what you pitched and what you deliver at the end are going to be divergent, but probably it should be if you've learned anything in the journey. And that's really an important space, to not feel like you've committed to a promise that you could only really fully understand through implementation. And like that understanding that there's a value in that in itself, you know, perhaps some of those prototypes that don't go on to become big productions within 2 years, you know, I think we understand that actually, like what you're talking about in terms of the pandemic, is there is like a collective resource that perhaps will be drawn on in 10 years by people whom we will never meet. But, you know, that's kind of that's the stage we're at. Like occasionally, because of no fault of anybody here, things can't come to fruition. The audience isn't there, the language isn't there, the institutions that might run the festivals aren't there. And so there's a degree to which, there's a degree to which I'd say like the unifying philosophy of there being value in R&D is something that is like completely necessary. And then I think CreativeXR in itself like has also evolved to understand how to support those different stages in that model that you looked at. Like, you know, I mean, you know, 2 years ago, Maddie and Ben were at Tribeca kind of hustling and trying to understand that landscape, which isn't really, which becomes more and more institutionalized, and kind of the gatekeepers kind of emerge, but perhaps they weren't there at the beginning. And whilst it's really interesting to be in places where there's no gatekeepers, you don't often know where to go to make something happen. So that landscape, it's not very rewarding because you don't know where to go for like an easy win. But like clearly over the past 4 years, you know, the fact that digital culture is something that's going to be way more familiar to people now as a kind of experience, or the word immersive actually in XR, I mean, not for those who think it's Extinction Rebellion, but that there is there's like, you're not trying to explain from scratch what you're doing. Like you definitely, I don't know if you remember, like with the Collider, there was no way we could explain that project to anybody who didn't do it. You know, that was constantly the problem. It was just like, there's 2 people, there's a space, there's a cupboard, there's some sand. And it just, you're going to need that prototyping fund because you're dealing with people who have never done the thing that you're trying to explain. And that will be less the case, I guess, in the future, but it's exciting to be in that position anyway.
Absolutely. And that's the thing I think that was really important when we first designed the program and it was something I'd found from my previous programs, that, you know, having something on a bit of paper, that sounds very old fashioned, to present to a financier or potential partner, they just don't know what it is, and you have to make something. I think there's 2 sides. You have to make something as a creator to start investigating how you make it and try it out and be able to iterate. And then to show it to potential partners, you have to have something because they don't know what it is. And people, you know, even though people might understand they might watch a lot of VR, they still don't know what your project is. And that's, I think, something that is really important to encourage, is to have, that we're trying to do, is have something that's presentable. Both, you know, Maddie mentioned, it's a prototype, you know, having the technology advice, having other types of mentoring advice on the creative development, but also it's presenting a really good case. So, you know, we help with the pitching this year. As Maddie mentioned, we had to go virtual. So we, all of the teams made these very good video productions to pitch their projects. And we actually helped with that. We had a production team that helped the teams make them. So all the presentation, the business plans, the decks, we help with as well. And like you said, May, it's very, it's knowing who you can talk to and being introduced to people as well. I think that I agree is something super important. I've got some other questions that I actually wanted to ask you as well. there's a question about the challenges of distribution and the insight into future commercial models that creators have discovered through CreativeXR. But first, I want to actually ask you about the kind of, because May, I want to talk about the kind of budgets. I know it's hard for you to mention a complete budget because you've obviously got Oculus involved and it's not something you can, I know with your contracts you can't talk about budgets. But it'd be really useful just to talk about the kind of partners you've worked with. And maybe I'm going to start with Darren, actually, because for Darren, you just have the funding from CreativeXR. It was £100,000, I think we gave you, wasn't it, was the budget?
It was, no, it's a little bit more than that. So we asked for, when it came to the presentation stage, we had our, I had our pitch deck and, this is what we're asking for. And it was 150,000, which was made up of in-kind from eCity Films that we were intending to put in. And then 100,000 came from CreativeXR, and then we had 20,000 from Story Futures Academy, just as they were starting. So that was put into it. Later on, when we finished it, we did like a BFI tax credit, which was something else that I'd learned about at Digital Catapult session, which was like a bit of a revelation. We put that in, and then we worked out actually that the full cost of it was around about 180,000 in the end, and that was a really interesting process because you start to understand actually as an artist like how much money and work and time you're putting into something that isn't actually being accounted for, and that helps you later on when you are budgeting again. So yeah, that was where we got to with that. It's all public money, so it's not a secret.
Yeah, thank you very much, Darren. And it's interesting, you were mentioning before when you were presenting the project, how it was something you hadn't thought of so much about distribution. And in fact, it was something I guess you would advise people to right at the beginning. And it's something I would always say to people developing projects, you have to think about the format and the end game right at the beginning.
I found myself a little bit stuck now in the sense of, I had done the film festival stuff, so I knew that was important. We had a conversation, actually, you and I, Liz, about taking it to council estates and getting it out there, which is something I'm very passionate about because my work is often around social justice. So, I wanted to do that. But yeah, I just hadn't really taken into account what would it take to get this onto the Oculus store, onto Vive or Steam. And even now with, it's on the Immersive Arcade, it's in the Museum of Other Realities. Unfortunately, we've got the 360 version on that because that's the file that's easiest to give them. So, kind of stuck in this kind of, I guess there's a kind of almost in a way a funding gap there for things that are finished for exhibition, and then the work that needs to go in, it could be another 20K just to format it correctly for those stores. And, potentially, work like this might not make money on stores, or you might not want to put a price on it. So it's a difficult sort of balancing act in terms of
I guess it's a lesson learned, and that's the thing, isn't it? Is prepare for distribution. Yeah. And it's interesting, I think, from what's happened with the pandemic, and I've noticed with Venice, because we did a virtual version of the festival, that the projects have to be publishable, and that's a very different thing from taking them to festivals and making festival versions. And it was a brilliant exercise, and I can see just from what's happened this year trying to find some positives. And I know it's really tough, Darren, because your LBE is a really exciting proposition, I think, especially community wise, and who the project's for. But people are professionalizing now. They're really thinking about making multiple formats, and most of the 44 projects, I know they're all different formats, but the ones that were published, the ones that weren't just Quest only, they all had versions for every single headset on PCVR and Vive, and it was it's really interesting seeing how it's changed. So May, you're working with, can you talk about the partners and how you and what,
Definitely. So I think kind of in a similar position to History of a Painting, our first round, we just took the 20K and we finished the project and we rushed to kind of get it out there. And I think with Goliath, we were like, no, we need to take time, because actually you just get really exhausted on a festival circuit and you don't really explore the opportunities. So Oculus came on board kind of as a result of the pitch session at CreativeXR. Then we'd been also part of the production bridge at Venice, and we'd pitched to the BFI, and then a few months later, maybe 6 months later, the BFI came on board. somebody who I'd also met through Venice, was a co-producer in France, Florial Films, Catayoun, who is, you know, the kind of the first time that Anagram went into co-production, supported the project getting money from CNC. And as we were discussing earlier, just even the overhead of what happens when you have these partners is just a huge next kind of level learning curve in terms of the project and kind of the scale and, you know, the way that Anagram has worked before, which is kind of nimble, fiercely protective of our artistic vision, and kind of totally in control of all of the elements, is something that's kind of, I don't say it's not threatened, obviously, it's just another kind of negotiation in terms of how to protect the project. Which, you know, the other thing which is really interesting is the fact that once you do scale up, the kind of scale at which you can find partnerships is completely different. You know, it's very, very hard to get anybody interested in your idea that's a prototype, but as soon as somebody gets wind that there's another big funder on board, it's a much sweeter proposition. So Goliath has been delayed, but, you know, it's a very, which means that you've kind of got a studio that's cash flowing a project because there's an advantage for it to take longer, which is a risk for any kind of studio in this environment where there isn't like core funding that comes easy from any particular business model. So it's, you know, it's been a really powerful kind of shift in how we've had to work. It's not something that I could guarantee would happen multiple times because every moment is unique. But yeah, that's the partnership.
That's very important. At the moment, we should say that it is very bespoke how you finance projects, but it's interesting looking at how the financial structure, you know, organically happened with Goliath, and it was fantastic. Just in a way, I come from film originally, and it's like a kind of independent film co-production. There are other models, obviously, for XR. You know, some things are more gamey, and then you might go to a storefront and be able to get all of the finance. It's really hard for narrative-based experience that have less game dynamic in them. And that's what I would say that the three of your projects are. I wanted, just because we haven't got very much time left, some very quick questions. And I also want to go back to, I want to go back to Maddie and Ben, actually. People are asking, I've had a few questions about this, about what about the things that didn't go through for production funding, that was, I love this expression, spectacular failures. You know, how do we document this? Do we talk about it? Do we give case studies?
Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question is about the projects that didn't get production funding for this round. So I wouldn't say that they are failures. You know, we do hope that those projects will continue to develop those relationships that they made through the showcase and market, and continue to seek for funding. In terms of, you know, how we continue to interact with them, we do have a team that kind of continues their relationship with Digital Catapult, and you know, we try to respond to any kind of requests and try to keep in touch as much as possible, and especially around you mentioned case studies, marketing and PR. You know, we always try to kind of be there and be supportive of that, especially around that and around like raising the profile of those projects.
And I guess actually it's really the whole point of having a prototype, you know, having prototype money, and it's £20,000, and obviously it's not huge, but it's not small. It's a good, you know, it's a good small amount of money to work with for a studio that can't develop things. People get to try out things, and this is really important for any medium. Wouldn't you say, Maddie and Ben, that you know, it's important to be able to iterate? And we've had many projects that didn't get production funding, like Maze, that went on to get made, and we've got many great projects that won't get production funding that will come out as well. But I know we're running out of time. I'm so sorry to cut into you, but I wanted to actually finish with Ben and actually ask him about the future of CreativeXR, because we've had a few questions about that, about how do we see the future and what are the next steps?
Absolutely. So, I mean, first thing I'd say, the project has run for 3 years and has been more successful than we imagined it would. And, you know, I'll go back to the title of this panel, 60 prototypes. That's actually quite a lot. That's actually quite a lot. So, and you know, the kind of reception that these projects have had on the international stage, Maddie and I kind of experienced that firsthand at Tribeca. It's been, you know, it's been really, as I say, it's kind of beyond where we thought we'd be with this. So, given that, we of course we are looking at what happens in the future and what we need to do in the future. We've had to pause our annual cycle for this year. And that kind of relates to the situation that we're all in, and particularly with the Arts Council, our need to deal with the kind of emergency response funds, and also kind of waiting for government to confirm who are our funders, what our funding looks like. So we paused our annual cycle, and we're using that pause as a bit of a kind of a breathing space to actually commission an external evaluation to look at the programme with a kind of a more objective set of eyes, obviously unbiased, to kind of tell us what's the impact we've had, what have we done well, what could we have done better, how could we develop in the future, does it still meet the needs of the you know, does it still meet its rationale for being. So we'll have a look at that, and from that, hopefully, we'll be able to take some learning that enables us to come back stronger and better in the future. So, sorry, that was a long answer. Short answer is watch this space.
Thank you, Ben. I'm sorry for all of those people who haven't been able to answer questions about Brexit, etc. Not that we don't want to answer it, but we don't have time. We're running out of time. So, just a little last thing is remember that Gaëlle Mourre's project History of a Painting is in the South by Southwest selection. So please have a look at that. Thank you so much to all the panelists. May, good luck with you know, the launch of Goliath. Excited to see the final version and to see where it launches. And Darren, sorry I didn't get a chance to ask you about our next projects, but good luck with what's happening, and really looking forward to seeing that location-based tour of Common Ground. So thanks also to Ben and Maddie for taking us through the programme, and thanks everyone for listening. Have a great day.
Thanks, Liz.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.